Hi, everyone. We are a week after DevOps Enterprise Summit, at least. Maybe I have that wrong. Yeah, I think we're 2 weeks out. It's been a busy couple of weeks, but we committed to recapping our views of the conference and recent DevOps Enterprise happenings. So here we are. Andrew, did you notice any common themes? Anything stand out to you as a highlight or trends this conference that have been growing over recent months versus Europe, for instance?
So again, the conference was really a joy. I carved out time to do it remotely as best I could. When you're at home, there's a lot of distractions. I think I would fare better in person, but we do the best we can with the circumstances. Such a well-organized conference, such high quality of talks, and so I really derived a lot of knowledge and inspiration from a lot of them. There's multiple themes I could probably draw from, but one that came up repeatedly across a lot of topics, a lot of talks, was on this software supply chain, and it's been sort of a resounding topic, especially since the SolarWinds hack that was discovered in this, I guess it was the spring or winter last year, and the CodeCov breach. And so a lot of the discussion, some of it was definitely software vendors coming and speaking up and basically pitching the importance of tools that help you to make sense of the software supply chain. So Steve, you'd mentioned going to a talk from Tidelift, the guy who founded Tidelift, which is, I gather, new in that space. The ones that I'm familiar with are Sonatype and Nexus, who both, and I'm sure that JFrog is kind of in that business as well. Like, these are the people who have dealt with package management in the past, and that's adjacent, building and storing your own packages internally is adjacent to what open source software packages do you bring in, which is adjacent to, are they secure or not, and what are the underlying vulnerabilities? The talk that I really absorbed most was Dr. Stephen McGill going through the state of software supply chain, and that's work he's collaborated on with Gene Kim. He's aligned with Sonatype, and it was really thoughtfully done research. And I just really loved the attention they were giving to doing this full data analysis. He's kind of an expert in Maven Central, the big sort of Java source package repository, but there was reference to NPM and NuGet or whatever. I don't know if that's a name, in fact, of a package library from Microsoft.
I think you're right. You're doing well, Andrew.
Thanks, man. Thanks. So it takes me back to CPAN for Perl. And so there's lots of these big libraries, but then the question is, as vulnerabilities are discovered, well, how quickly are vulnerabilities discovered? How quickly are they patched? How robustly is that software library maintained? What are the upstream dependencies? And you begin to realize it's a super complicated problem. And there were a couple of nice takeaways from Stephen McGill's talk, like, generally just stay close to the latest version, not bleeding edge, but like a couple of subversions behind is a nice sweet spot. So that's the too long didn't read version, too long didn't watch version of his talk. But that strategy works really well. And one of the things that you and I were chatting about just before this is, if you go to a talk at a conference or whatever, and it's by a vendor sponsored talk, like, do we treat that with more suspicion than we would just an independent analyst or a good-hearted person who's discovered something and wants to share it with the world, as three, caricature personas that you might see giving conference talks? And like, there is a degree of suspicion we have about people with a commercial motivation, as part of marketing. And it occurs to me that that's also an information supply chain question. It's like, is the information supply chain being polluted by ulterior motivations? Like, what is this person's actual motivation? And, and to what degree are any of us actually independent? And that is an important and legitimate question. Like, you and I, our main focus has been about clarity. Like, how do you establish clarity, clear understanding? And clarity, the second component, obviously, is value. And as you get people with values that are biased towards wanting to see a certain outcome, like getting people to do a certain behavior, then you begin to see manipulation of the information, skewing of the information in this direction or
Mhm.
that direction. So that's why we're, I think, wisely, cautious about marketing materials and advertising and so forth. At the end of the day, though, everyone is motivated by something. Like maybe we're motivated by a wish to increase our reputation. Maybe we're legitimately motivated by a wish to benefit others through sharing information, hard-won information. And we can have a
Mm.
mix of these motivations. But anyway, so information supply chain, looking at what are the motivations underlying that, and really thinking about that as a supply chain problem.
Mhm.
I would say the case for vendor stepping in to help with this securing package management is there's just so damn much information, right?
Oh, yeah.
That unless you have an automated tool like Sonatype or something to manage that, you're gonna fail. You as an
Right,
individual, you're not gonna be
right.
staying up to, and you don't want to. You don't want to be looking at like all of these,
Y you're not
vulnerabilities
in the
that need,
business of
right.
securing your, your components. You care about customer outcomes. I think that that's probably a unique point that we're at now is this blend of information and work and artifact flow, right? We've got these three things kind of converging, and it signifies a maturing of this ecosystem, this community, this DevOps community. I mean, we're talking beyond velocity. We can go
Right.
fast. We can deliver results, superior results. How do you do that well? How do you do that sustainably? How do you do that at scale? And in an increasingly mature market where trust is now being distributed, right? Where you're now, in order to move fast, you have to have this degree of trust. One thing that stood out for me in the Tidelift presentation was that 70% of enterprise code is open source.
Mm.
And so that is, that's implicit or explicit trust. I think that a lot of organizations are going to start realizing that that is true, and that hasn't been by design. It's just that's how you go fast. And I think that this idea about how open source ideas, what percentage of the narrative or your vision for how you work and how your organization excels is open source, is coming from other places. How much of that do you own? And how much are you vulnerable to different understandings of what is making up your vision? Like it reminds me of early days of DevOps where people were like, okay, well, what is this? Is this culture? Is it tooling? Is it, it's comms, but like, what's the ratio here? What are we talking about? Sure, it's culture, but is it like, are we just saying that? Is it really that? And then we've had almost like I see poisoning of the supply chain with like people doing like DevSecOps. It's like just like sliding in a package to say like, okay, well, here's a huge opportunity for us to brand something and draw attention to a specific area, which is valid, right? Security is very, very important, but you're almost injecting something into the information flow or the information supply chain by saying, okay, well, we've got this supply chain for DevOps. People are talking about it. Let's inject some security conversation into that. And what does that do for the integrity of the supply chain, right? What does it do for the integrity of the conversation? Is it diluting? Is it focusing? Is it clarifying? Is it bringing more people in? Is it putting the messaging at risk of being co-opted by vendors or any specific interests? That's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Obviously, a lot there, right? That's 70% of all enterprise code being open source. The comment that you made, there's either implicit or explicit trust. Explicit trust means you really know and you've carefully vetted those packages. Implicit trust means, the developer needed a tool to get something done
Right.
really quickly, and it just got in there somehow. And the idea that you have to that is the way you said, that is the way to go fast, because there's such a phenomenal vast body of resources that have been created and basically shared for free, because there's no marginal cost of distribution for open source. The power of that, like creating these industry-wide solutions, is enormous. So I think I guess my final conclusion is that it's a multi-dimensional thing. You need to look at speed, you need to look at value, you need to look at security, you need to look at a variety of these dimensions, and understand that everything we're doing is always supply chain, right? It's always information supply chain or software supply chain or the supply chain of getting work done. So a lot great reflections of the conference. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks. We'll be back to this topic, I'm sure.